And so just being mindful of that and letting you know, like I think I was emailing you other suggested speakers. Unfortunately, Jojo had an urgency that he told me about at 6 a.m. yesterday. So, you know, I didn't have time to find another co-panelist and feel badly about that because I think he would have brought another perspective to it. But at the same time, you know, I think that there's also a different perspective that I learned about from Paula Edgar, who I think you know, and she does really amazing presentations on implicit bias. She's amazing. Also, CUNY alum, and she told me that she's had interesting conversations with folks at law firms that are asked to participate in the kind of work, like pro bono work, based on presumptions of their affinities that they may have, and they don't want to necessarily do that because they want to like work on something else that is going to help their career trajectory and give them face time with a certain partner, right? And so, like, I think there's also a burden that you place in some occasions, right? If you're always like, every time we have a Spanish-speaking client, we're going to get the paralegal that speaks Spanish to do the interpretation, and always, instead of exploring other models or, you know, developing more resources. And so I think that you have to be like both supporting, amplifying, and promoting, and also being thoughtful about, you know, how that's impacting everyone's workload and the pressure that they might feel.
I so appreciate that example of if you don't understand a language, you find someone that knows the language to interpret for you without going with the assumption that you can take and digest what that is. And the same applies to cultures and communities, right? I appreciate you acknowledging that your willingness to understand that and know that you're limited in what you may or may not understand in this work. And that's often what's missing in these kinds of conversations, right? You want to defer to someone else, but you bring with your presence an allyship with the work that is very critically important. And so even as you talked about, and it was talked about the idea of looking to the medical profession as being on the leading edge of these conversations, but you can gain wisdom from that. I see the same in philanthropy. I keep saying, I would put my philanthropy hat on, right? And I see the same in that because as we have these conversations around race and racial equity, it's still being a very touchy topic in spaces. And funders, that comparison around lawyer-client could be funder and grantee, right?
Definitely.
That same kind of power dynamic, all those other things that show up in these ways of being altruistic or seeking solutions in places that you know there's inequity and injustice. So kudos, I think, with or without your co-panelists, I mean, you bring the right conversation into the room.
Thank
so
you. I really appreciate you saying that, because I mean, Yolanda and I had a very funny conversation because I don't even know if I should admit this right now, but I'm going to. It's a small room, although I'm being videotaped. Where's the when they posted the promotion at the city bar of that panel I was mentioning that led to this, they mixed up the name under which photo. Oh. Right? And so like a week later, I get an email from Yolanda at Lawyers of Color asking me to speak, and I'm like, and I didn't know how to ask. And so I kind of just was like, and my husband was in the room when I called, and I was like, can we have a chat? Like, who else, because I'm like, how did you hear about me? And she's like, oh, my interns, were online and Googling it, and I was like, did they see, where did they see me speak? I'm kind of gently touching her, and so finally I'm just like, because you know that I am white, right? And I'm like, so I said a little softer, and so we ended up laughing about it and talking about sort of some of these issues and what I could potentially bring to the table and how I really thought it was important to bring other speakers because I didn't want to that was my personal commitment to this. It was the first of one, and then I got off the phone and my husband was like, that could have gone way worse. Thanks. So share that story anyway, even though it's like very awkward for me.
I just want to, in the same line, I think that the term cultural humility is so much better than competence.
Agreed,
And
agreed.
5 years ago, the tribes in Minnesota were like, don't use this competence, you know. And really, I learned it from the Native people who, we have an Indian law program, it's like, it's an ongoing. So I think that all of your slides and all of your materials are, you know, it's really good, but
I
competence
agree.
just taps right into that lawyer, master, servant.
Agreed, and I think, I mean, it's knowing your audience and moving them towards humility, like by including, because if you call it cultural humility and no one shows up, right? And so this is where we're starting the conversation and building on that. And so the next presentation we do is going to be called Cultural Humility and Legal Practice, right? And get more people to the table.
Good.
And because a lot of them haven't even heard the term at all. And so, you know, there are different ways to get your messaging out. And I think that part of it is who's in the room and what are they going to respond to. And so this was for lawyers, as this was today as well, and fundraisers. And so back to your point about hiring and promoting diverse staff and how we're all benefiting from diverse viewpoints. You know, again, bringing people to the table for presentations, you know, thinking outside the box. You know, I was at an event last night where people were being honored for their work with trafficking and domestic violence survivors. They weren't called survivors, they were called victims. They had the beneficiary of 15 years of pro bono legal assistance in the room, up on the dais. We didn't hear from that person's perspective in any way, shape, or form. We hear from the judge and like all these different people. And so, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we could be incorporating the voices of the communities that we serve in the funding, like direction of funders, in the hiring at the nonprofits, and I think your effort here to start to create resources for solo and small firm practices, because, you know, if you're not being hired at the legal services organizations or the big firms, you know what I mean? I think there is an integration there or a support system for that population that's not happening. And I'm sure that if you have a way to tap into the desires and needs of the people who need the legal services and aren't getting them, or are maybe not satisfied with the level of legal services that they're getting, and having their voices speak to what they want to see. Not everyone wants to have a free lawyer from legal services that you have to wait 3 weeks to talk to. Not all of them, you know, would qualify for certain types of pro bono at big law firms. So how are you meeting that gap? And I know that you have a model that's being talked about later today. I think we're going to run out of time. So you know, I think right now apparently leadership is on board, and people are seeking more areas for improvement, buy-in from lawyers in prioritizing this, understanding why it's important, and finding the resources. So that's the piece for the funders. Funders need to be, you know, I felt guilty because Paula Edgar is a consultant now who does amazing presentation. I was very lucky to see her speak at PLI, the Practicing Law Institute, in like the Women in Law panels. And we didn't have the resources to pay her to come on the panel, which is why I was like, I don't know if we could bring her. You know what I mean? Because like we have to find resources so that people who have expertise in this area are compensated, and how does that happen? Or are we just going to keep doing everything ad hoc? So investing, I think another area for improvement that I speak about in terms of working with interpreters is firms and nonprofits not investing in professional interpreters, and even getting family members to do the interpreting, or people who aren't trained to be interpreters, using lawyers to be the interpreters instead of the lawyers. All of those are models that really are not ideal. Sue Bryant had a great point. She's like, a long time ago, no one had computers to do their legal work. Would anyone think about practicing law without a computer today? No. We need to get to the same point in terms of providing proper and appropriate interpreters in the settings, especially given, you know, how critical language access is for protecting due process rights. I think this was interesting, the assumption because we do nonprofit work, we're already culturally competent. I think that was a really good point as well. And convincing others it's important to be continually trained. I think we talked about that. This is another area that is like a really important issue for me. I think I